Have you ever wondered about the true depths of human potential? Not just for soaring greatness, but for profound, unimaginable destruction? We often look at historical figures through a simplified lens, painting them as purely good or irredeemably evil. But what if the truth, as always, is far more intricate, more unsettling? A tapestry woven with threads of personal trauma, societal anxieties, and chilling ideological conviction? Today, we're going to embark on an ambitious journey, not to glorify, but to meticulously dissect one of history's most enigmatic and terrifying figures, Adolf Hitler. We will trace the path from his unassuming birth to the cataclysm he unleashed, searching for the crucial turning points, the forgotten warnings, and the enduring lessons. Prepare to challenge what you think you know, to sit with uncomfortable truths, and perhaps to see echoes of the past in the present. Before we dive into this complex narrative, take a moment to let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. I'm genuinely curious about our global community of history enthusiasts, all connected by a desire to understand our shared past. Our story begins not with a roar of ambition, but with a quiet entry into the world. On April 20th, 1889, in the sleepy Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, Adolf Hitler entered the world. This seemingly unremarkable birth held no immediate omens of the unfathomable darkness he would later unleash. His early life was, by many accounts, far from extraordinary, marked by a strained relationship with his authoritarian, often abusive father, Alois, and an almost suffocating devotion to his doting, overprotective mother, Clara. Imagine a young boy constantly striving, often unsuccessfully, for approval from a distant and harsh paternal figure, finding solace only in the unwavering affection of his mother. When that sole source of unconditional love is tragically taken from him by illness, what kind of emotional void does it leave? What kind of emotional landscape is created for the seeds of resentment, frustration, and a desperate search for belonging to take root? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? How early family dynamics can lay an almost invisible foundation for future psychological patterns. Hitler's academic performance was largely undistinguished, a source of constant friction with his father, who pushed him towards a career in the civil service. Yet young Adolf harbored vastly different aspirations. He dreamed of becoming a celebrated painter. It's a bizarre twist of fate, isn't it? The man who would later orchestrate the destruction of millions began as a failed artist. His path led him to Vienna, a city that, at the turn of the 20th century, was a vibrant, sprawling cultural melting pot, a hub of art, music, philosophy, but also, crucially, a hotbed of fervent nationalism and virulent anti-Semitism. He twice failed the entrance examination to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, a blow to his fragile ego that he never truly overcame. But what if those rejections weren't just artistic setbacks, but fundamental blows to a deeply narcissistic personality that then sought validation through far darker, more destructive avenues? It's a haunting what if that begs us to consider the pathways our unfulfilled dreams can sometimes take. During his impoverished years in Vienna, living in dilapidated men's homes, Hitler became a voracious reader, but selectively. He absorbed the prevalent pan-Germanic nationalist sentiments and, critically, the widespread anti-Semitic rhetoric that permeated Austrian society. Figures like Vienna's mayor Karl Lueger, a populist who skillfully wielded anti-Jewish sentiment for political gain, and Georg von Schönerer, an extreme pan-German nationalist, became unwitting architects of Hitler's nascent worldview. He didn't invent these ideas. He simply, frighteningly, adopted them, refined them, and weaponized them with an unparalleled zeal. Imagine the atmosphere in those cramped, smoky communal living spaces filled with other discontented, unemployed men, where resentments festered and extremist ideologies circulated freely, providing simplistic answers to complex personal and societal failures. His move to Germany in 1913, a quiet departure from his homeland, seemed insignificant at the time. Yet it was a prelude to the seismic shifts that would soon engulf him. But it was World War I that truly forged the crucible of his radicalization. He volunteered for the German army, a desperate search for purpose and belonging that had eluded him in civilian life. He served on the Western Front, a chaotic and brutal landscape of mud, gas attacks, and constant death, a place where the limits of human endurance were tested daily. It was here, amidst the trenches and the constant threat of mortality, that he was awarded the Iron Cross for bravery. This commendation, a symbol of valor, stands in chilling contrast to the atrocities he would later orchestrate. He was, by all accounts, a dedicated soldier, finding a perverse sense of order and camaraderie in the rigid structure of military life, a stark contrast to his earlier aimless, solitary existence. For a man who had felt like a societal outcast, the army offered structure, purpose, and a strange, dangerous sense of belonging. It was a brutal school, but for Hitler, it was also a place where he felt he finally mattered. Can you truly grasp the psychological shift from feeling utterly lost to finding a dangerous purpose in the crucible of war? A purpose that would eventually consume not just him, but an entire continent? The end of the war, however, plunged Germany into a maelstrom of political and economic turmoil. The armistice and the subsequent Treaty of Versailles, with its harsh reparations, territorial losses, and the infamous war guilt clause, fueled a deep sense of national humiliation and seething resentment among the German populace. Imagine the collective psyche of a nation, once proud and powerful, now brought to its knees, grappling with crippling hyperinflation, widespread unemployment, and the specter of communist revolution. This was fertile ground for despair and disillusionment, a void begging to be filled by a strong leader, a charismatic voice promising redemption and restoration. This period wasn't just a backdrop to his rise, it was the very oxygen that allowed his extremism to breathe and grow, transforming a personal sense of failure into a national grievance he promised to rectify. The year 1919 proved to be another seemingly insignificant step that would, with horrifying inevitability, reverberate through the annals of history. Hitler, while still in the army, was assigned to monitor political parties in Munich. He stumbled upon a small, obscure political group known as the German Workers' Party, DAP, a nationalist organization with the strong anti-Semitic leanings, meeting in a smoky beer hall. Driven by curiosity and perhaps a burgeoning sense of political destiny, he attended a meeting. What he discovered there was a platform for his burgeoning rhetorical skills. He was quickly drawn to the group, initially as a propaganda officer, and soon his powerful oratory, his ability to tap into the anxieties and frustrations of the common person, rapidly propelled him through the ranks. At this point, the DAP was a mere whisper in the cacophony of post-war German politics, a fringe group with barely a few dozen members. Yet, within this fledgling organization, Hitler found his voice, a raw, almost mesmerizing power to articulate grievances and offer simple, albeit terrifying, solutions. He spoke of national honor, of betrayal, of a pure German race threatened by internal enemies. He offered scapegoats, the Jews, the communists, the November criminals who had signed the armistice. Have you ever witnessed how a single individual, armed with nothing but words, can sway the masses, transforming whispers of discontent into roars of fury? The power of rhetoric, for good or ill, is truly astonishing. A force that can both unite and tragically divide. By 1921, his influence had become undeniable, his charisma a magnetic force for those desperate for a strong leader. He was appointed the leader of the Nazi Party, as the DAP had by then rebranded itself, a name that would forever be etched in history as a symbol of terror and unspeakable suffering. His ascent within the party was remarkably rapid, fueled by a populace yearning for stability and a return to a perceived national glory. However, his path to power wasn't without its dramatic stumbles. In November 1923, emboldened by Mussolini's successful march on Rome and believing the moment was ripe, Hitler attempted the beer hall putsch, a clumsy, almost farcical attempt to seize power through brute force in Munich. It was a chaotic march through the streets, quickly dispersed by police gunfire. This amateurish endeavor landed him in prison, a significant setback that, by all rational measures, should have ended his political career. Yet even in confinement, his ambition burned brighter. He was sentenced to 5 years, but served just over 1 year, a remarkably lenient sentence that many historians now view as a colossal misjudgment by the judiciary, who perhaps saw him more as a misguided patriot than a genuine threat. It was during this period of incarceration, specifically at Landsberg prison, that he penned Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. This sprawling, often rambling manifesto of his twisted ideology laid bare his venomous worldview in agonizing detail. His insidious belief in Aryan supremacy, a concept that would fuel the most horrific racial cleansing in history. His virulent anti-Semitism, portraying Jews as a global conspiracy intent on undermining Germany. His radical anti-communism, seeing Bolshevism as a Jewish plot, and his extreme nationalism, advocating for a greater German Reich that would conquer and colonize Eastern Europe for Lebensraum, or living space. It wasn't just a political treatise. It was a meticulously detailed, chilling blueprint for a future filled with unspeakable horrors, a premonition of the events to come. While in prison, he essentially refined his dangerous ideas, transforming his political grievances into a coherent, albeit utterly warped, ideology, setting the stage for his next, more strategic moves. The global economic crisis of 1929, the Great Depression, then swept across the world, and Germany was hit particularly hard. Factories shuttered, unemployment skyrocketed, and widespread despair gripped the nation. Imagine the psychological toll on ordinary families suddenly faced with destitution, their savings worthless, their future uncertain. This economic devastation became an unexpected yet profoundly significant boon for the Nazi Party. People desperate for solutions, for a way out of the abyss, began to turn to extremist parties offering simplistic yet seemingly powerful answers. The Nazis, with their promises of national revival, economic stability, and a return to order, capitalized on this widespread suffering with ruthless efficiency. They blamed the Weimar Republic, the Treaty of Versailles, and, of course, their scapegoats, the Jews and the Communists. By 1932, through relentless campaigning, propaganda, and exploitation of public fear, the Nazis had become the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament. They still lacked a majority, but their momentum was undeniable, their presence a looming shadow over the fragile Weimar Republic. This period serves as a stark reminder of how economic hardship and social unrest can create fertile ground for demagoguery and extreme ideologies to take root. If you are finding this deep dive into history fascinating, if these intricate details are sparking new questions for you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue to bring more untold stories, more vital lessons to light. The year 1933 marked the definitive, terrifying end of German democracy and the chilling dawn of a new totalitarian era. On January 30th, 1933, despite the Nazis lacking a clear majority in the Reichstag, President Paul von Hindenburg, an aging war hero who perhaps misjudged Hitler's true intentions and succumbed to immense political pressure from conservative elites who believed they could control him, appointed Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. It was a fatal miscalculation, a decision that would plunge not only Germany, but eventually the entire world into unprecedented darkness. Hitler, once an obscure radical, now stood at the helm of the nation, poised to dismantle the very foundations of its democratic institutions. The gentleman's agreement that many believed they had with Hitler, thinking they could use him for their own political ends, proved to be nothing but a fragile illusion, a fatal misjudgment of a man whose only loyalty was to absolute, unbridled power. Then came the infamous Reichstag fire in February 1933, an event still shrouded in some historical debate but widely attributed to the Nazis themselves, orchestrated to create a pretext for emergency powers. The building, the very symbol of German democracy, burned, and Hitler seized the moment with ruthless opportunism. This seemingly chaotic event allowed him to push through the Reichstag fire decree, a draconian measure that effectively suspended fundamental civil liberties, eroding rights like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, and the right to privacy. It was a swift, decisive blow, delivered under the guise of restoring order and combating a supposed communist threat, but explicitly designed to crush dissent and consolidate power. Think about that. How quickly freedoms can be stripped away when fear takes hold, when a nation is convinced that security outweighs liberty. It's a chilling lesson that resonates even today, isn't it? The power of a manufactured crisis to justify tyranny. The Enabling Act, passed in March 1933, was the final, devastating nail in the coffin of German democracy. This act, rammed through Parliament with intimidation, manipulation, and the absence of many opposition members who had already been arrested, granted Hitler dictatorial powers. It allowed him to enact laws without the consent of the Reichstag, effectively bypassing parliamentary oversight and ending any semblance of democratic governance in Germany. It was the legal framework for tyranny, a terrifying precedent for how easily democratic mechanisms can be twisted to serve dictatorial ends. With this immense power consolidated, Hitler moved swiftly and systematically to dismantle any remaining opposition and to synchronize every aspect of German life with Nazi ideology. He banned all political parties except the Nazi Party, transforming Germany into a totalitarian, one-party state. Any alternative voice was silenced. Trade unions, once powerful bastions of workers' rights and collective bargaining, were ruthlessly dissolved, their leaders arrested, and their assets confiscated. Their place was taken by the German Labor Front, a Nazi-controlled organization. Power was centralized, moving from federal states to Berlin, ensuring absolute control from the top down. Every aspect of German life, from education to media, from youth organizations to professional associations, was brought under the chillingly efficient grip of the Nazi regime in a process known as Gleichschaltung, or coordination. This wasn't just abstract policy, it had real, immediate human consequences. Consider someone like Ernst Thälmann, the outspoken leader of the Communist Party, who was arrested shortly after the Reichstag fire and spent the next 11 years in concentration camps. A stark and brutal example of the fate awaiting any who dared to resist, or even simply existed outside the Nazi vision. Then, in August 1934, upon the death of the venerable President Hindenburg, Hitler shrewdly, and without legal challenge, combined the offices of Chancellor and President, taking on the title of Führer, leader, and Chancellor of the Reich. This move solidified his absolute, unchallenged authority, making him the undisputed head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and supreme arbiter of German destiny. The transformation was complete, from an obscure, failed artist and political agitator to the unchallenged, godlike dictator of a once democratic nation. It was a chilling testament to the fragility of democratic institutions when faced with determined and ruthless ambition, coupled with a population desperate for strong leadership and order amidst chaos. With the last vestiges of democratic accountability erased and the path to absolute power clear, Hitler now turned his gaze outwards, towards a world he intended to reshape in his own monstrous image, driven by the core tenets he had laid out in Mein Kampf. The groundwork for conquest had been meticulously laid, The next phase would be one of aggressive expansion and the systematic persecution of perceived enemies, both within and beyond Germany's borders. The echoes of this moment, how quickly a nation can shed its democratic skin, compel us to remain ever vigilant about the liberties we often take for granted. What are the key warning signs, in your opinion, that a society might be drifting towards authoritarianism? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's discuss. With absolute power firmly in his grasp, Hitler wasted no time in implementing his radical agenda, transforming Germany from a struggling republic into a rearmed, aggressive military state. His foreign policy was a direct, contemptuous repudiation of the international order established after World War I. He aggressively began to rearm Germany, a blatant and intentional violation of the Treaty of Versailles, which had severely restricted Germany's military capabilities and imposed crippling reparations. He scoffed at the treaty's limitations, viewing them as an affront to German sovereignty and a national humiliation that needed to be avenged. This rearmament wasn't just about rebuilding an army. It was a clear signal of his expansionist ambitions, a relentless drumbeat of war that grew steadily louder, echoing across Europe. It also served a dual purpose domestically. It revitalized the German economy, providing jobs and a sense of purpose for many, thus further cementing his popularity at home. A stark example of how dangerous economic recovery can be when tied to military buildup. He then embarked on a series of daring, aggressive territorial expansions, each one testing the resolve of the international community, pushing the boundaries of what the world would tolerate. One of his first bold moves was the reoccupation of the Rhineland in March 1936. This region, demilitarized by the Treaty of Versailles, was meant to be a buffer zone. Hitler gambled, sending troops into the Rhineland, knowing that a strong French or British response could have crushed his nascent military. Yet no significant action was taken. This success emboldened him further, confirming his belief that the Western powers lacked the will to confront him. Then came 1938, a year that saw the map of Europe begin to redraw itself under Hitler's aggressive hand. First, he orchestrated the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. Through a combination of political pressure, military threats, and orchestrated internal uprisings, he forced Austria's capitulation and absorption into the Greater German Reich. While some Austrians welcomed the Union, many others felt terrified and helpless, their nation swallowed whole. The international response was weak, a series of protests but no decisive action, further confirming Hitler's assessment of their timidity. But the most significant capitulation came with the occupation of the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a significant German-speaking population. Hitler stoked ethnic tensions, claiming that Germans in the Sudetenland were being persecuted and that Germany had a right to protect them. This led to the infamous Munich Agreement in September 1938. Imagine the scene. The leaders of Britain, Neville Chamberlain, France, Édouard Daladier, and Italy, Benito Mussolini, met with Hitler, essentially carving up Czechoslovakia without Czech representation. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned to London proclaiming peace for our time, clutching the agreement as a triumph of diplomacy. In reality, it was a humiliating capitulation to Hitler's demands, a clear demonstration of appeasement that only fueled his insatiable appetite for conquest and convinced him that he could take whatever he wanted without serious repercussions. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about the true cost of inaction and compromise in the face of escalating aggression? The lessons of appeasement, of sacrificing principles for a fleeting hope of peace, still echo powerfully in geopolitical discussions today, a constant reminder of the fine line between diplomacy and capitulation. Just months later, in March 1939, Hitler brazenly violated the Munich Agreement, occupying the rest of Czechoslovakia, proving that his promises were utterly worthless. The world finally began to awaken, albeit slowly, to the true nature of his ambitions. As the decade drew to a close, Hitler made a shocking diplomatic maneuver that stunned the world and paved the way for immediate conflict. In August 1939, he signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union. This non-aggression treaty between two ideologically opposed totalitarian powers, Nazism and Bolshevism, was a cynical marriage of convenience. It publicly promised non-aggression, but privately included secret protocols dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, with Poland brutally partitioned between them. This pact, a deceptive alliance born of cold strategic calculation rather than shared values, effectively cleared the way for the invasion of Poland. With the threat of a devastating two-front war removed, Hitler was free to unleash his military might on Germany's eastern neighbor, setting the stage for the most devastating conflict in human history. The threads of diplomacy, once intended to weave peace, were now being twisted into a noose for Europe. Each agreement, each capitulation, a deliberate step closer to catastrophe. If you're finding this meticulous tracing of Hitler's path to war compelling, please consider sharing this video with others who are interested in understanding the deeper currents of history. It helps these vital stories reach a wider audience. The storm finally broke on September 1st, 1939. Germany invaded Poland, a brutal and swift assault that caught the world by surprise and, finally, triggered World War II. The invasion marked the beginning of a conflict that would consume the globe, claiming tens of millions of lives and fundamentally reshaping the geopolitical landscape. Hitler's military campaigns, initially devastatingly effective, expanded rapidly across Europe. His innovative and terrifying blitzkrieg, or lightning war, tactics combined overwhelming force, speed, and coordinated air and ground attacks, quickly overwhelming nations like Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and most shockingly, France. The fall of France in a mere 6 weeks stunned the world. The initial victories fueled his hubris and cemented his image as an invincible leader in the eyes of many Germans who saw their national pride restored and their country seemingly unstoppable. The Battle of Britain, fought primarily in the skies in 1940, marked his first major setback, as the Royal Air Force, despite being heavily outnumbered, fiercely defended their homeland and prevented a German invasion. However, the tide of war eventually, inexorably, began to turn. In June 1941, Hitler made his most catastrophic strategic blunder, the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. It was the largest land invasion in history, a monumental undertaking that stretched German resources to their breaking point. This was not just a territorial conquest, it was an ideological war of annihilation, driven by Hitler's fanatical hatred of Bolshevism and his racist vision of Lebensraum, living space, for the German people in the East. He envisioned enslaving or exterminating the Slavic populations and exploiting their vast resources. The brutal Russian winter, coupled with fierce Soviet resistance and the vast, unforgiving distances, decimated German forces and shattered Hitler's illusions of a quick victory. This monumental failure marked the definitive beginning of the end for the Nazi war machine, draining its manpower and resources in a brutal, protracted struggle. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the Allies were preparing their counterpunch. The North African and Italian campaigns had already opened up secondary fronts, diverting German resources.